Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Weber, and today's guest is Kenneth Valentine, a retired special agent with the United States Secret Service. And today, our topic is the White House response to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks and subsequent evacuations, told through the eyes of someone who was there on scene and has firsthand knowledge of the event. Ken, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today.
You bet, Jim. My pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the discussion and working around all the things that I can't say. But there's a lot that I can say, so I'm looking forward to working through it.
Absolutely. You beat me to the punch. I was going to say, I'm sure I might bring up some topics that you just can't due to security restrictions and confidentialities. There's just some things you won't be able to mention. Yeah. So I apologize ahead of time if I ask something, but feel free to just say, hey, I can't speak to that, and we'll move on. All right.
Sure. Yeah. For many years, I didn't talk about 9/11 because there wasn't much out there, and I didn't want to break some, protocol or rule that, I wasn't even sure about. But, since the events of 9/11, there's been a lot in the news. And so it's kind of freed me up to speak about what I did, what I saw, and what kind of reaction we had to what was going on. So that's given me some freedom and some cover. And so I'm looking forward to talking through it.
Good deal. And I know we both know this and listeners know this, but 9/11 was such a devastating and just a transformative moment in history. And it impacted so many lives across the country and around the world. And it reshaped the way that we thought about everything, safety, both personally, professionally, nationally, and internationally. So, I think people are going to find it interesting to hear, how it pertained to the White House and staff, and personnel there. So, again, I'm looking forward to this. Let me, I want to read a little bit about you. You've got a fantastic website, and it's very informational. And as I was preparing for today, I reviewed it. And I just wanted to read a little bit, a blurb off of your site about yourself so listeners know Ken and kind of your perspective and where you're coming from. Would that be okay?
You bet. Yeah. Go for it. I'm curious what you picked out of there.
Hey, it's all positive. It came straight off your website. So it's just a little bit about your bio. And you began your Secret Service career in 1996, assigned as a special agent at Louisville, Kentucky. And then in 2000, you were transferred to the Presidential Protective Division to begin a 5-year assignment with both Presidents Clinton and President Bush. And then in 2009, as President Obama took office, you were promoted back to the president's detail. And after serving as a special agent in charge of the Oklahoma City field office and the Dignitary Protective Division, you retired from government service to pursue corporate security and operational risk consulting. And I think that's it's very informational. It's very interesting. And I think it's important to mention that so listeners have a concept of where you're coming from when we talk about our story. Is there anything about your background or your bio that I missed that you think you might want to mention?
Well, there are a lot of gaps in there, but yeah, it's typical career, I think, for Secret Service, a lot of federal law enforcement where you get bounced around. We lived in DC 3 different times, transferred in, transferred out, back again, and you know, I think as you pursue different options within your career, it you know, moves were a necessity. It's just part of the job. You know, thankfully, I had an understanding wife that rolled with the punches and agreed to these transfers and all that stuff. And at the same time, we were raising kids. You know, we've got 5 kids, and so that was a team effort. You know, team project
Oh
going
yeah.
forward, doing all that at the same time, and the one of the things about my career that I actually love, and it's something about the Secret Service and HSI. A lot of federal agencies allow agents to go up to the Hill and do fellowships,
Hmm.
and so and I've got a law degree, so I was kind of interested in doing a fellowship. I'd heard about these things and was very fortunate to be given that opportunity. And so when I left the President's Detail the first time, I applied for and got one of these fellowships. And so I went
Oh
up
wow.
to Senate Judiciary Committee, and I was an advisor to Senator Hatch on Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was the outgoing chairman, so he didn't have a lot of staff, and so that was perfect for me because I got to kind of be in his face a lot and advise him on crime and criminal justice issues before the committee. And to make a long story short, I wrote a bill with a lot of help from DOJ and from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children about sex offenders, and it was about going after sex offenders. And I gave it a terrible name on some bad advice. I called it the Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act because I didn't know the value of giving it a good name like the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I mean, that's a great name, and I just wasn't, you know, I was just green. I didn't know,
Sure.
whole new job for me. I'm a knuckle dragging Secret Service agent sent up to the Hill with all these Harvard and Yale lawyers and whatnot, and I'm just
Right.
doing the best I can do. But when the bill passed the Senate, it went over to the House, and they liked the bill. They added a bunch of stuff to the bill, but they also renamed it, and they wisely renamed it the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act.
Oh
And
wow.
so this was, so I'd been working on it for a year, pushing it through the Senate and all that, and working with the National Center. You know, got to know John Walsh, and they rightly named it after his abducted and murdered son Adam. And so you know, I guess a longer story shorter, in 2006, me and John Walsh and everybody else is in the Rose Garden. President Bush is signing that bill into law,
Wow.
and you know, that engagement. I didn't know anything about sex offenders or you know, protecting kids and all that. I protected presidents, but not kids necessarily, except my own kids, and so that engagement stuck with me. And you know, you were asking what else have you done? When
Yeah.
I retired from the Secret Service, John Walsh called and said, "Hey, you're eligible to be on the board now, and I'm nominating you to be on the board of directors for NCMEC." And so I said, "Well, that sounds great. What I need to do?" And he said, "Just sit tight." And so the next day they had a board meeting, and I got voted on the board. And so I've been doing that for 5 years. Well, that has led to a lot of just eye-opening activity and things that I've really enjoyed doing on behalf of kids, and you know, just trying to protect kids, whether
Oh
they're
yeah.
exploited, missing, murdered, trying to identify kids, give that family closure, and that led to me being involved locally in a ministry called the Well House, and and they are a little more boots on the ground. The National Center is a clearinghouse for information, and tips come in and information comes in, and they cycle that information and pass it back out to law enforcement for action. The well house is more of it's a home for recovered women and girls from sex trade. And so they bring them in and they just give them an opportunity to be restored physically, mentally, in every way. They get an opportunity to be restored. Some of them stay at the well house for years on their journey to recovery, and then set back out into society healthy again. And so I've really enjoyed that. And I guess along the way, I've written a couple of books and get out and speak.
Yeah.
So I love being busy. I think Secret Service was great for me because I never did get a chance to take a break in the Secret Service. But, 24
Yeah.
years of fun. I loved every bit of it. So, um, so that's a long story short, I guess. If
Yeah,
it, or
no,
short
that is
answer.
fan. I am so glad you mentioned that because in preparing today for today, I'm like, this guy is super interesting and has such a long career. The topics of conversation to narrow it down today was so tough
Mm,
because of what things of what you just mentioned, the experiences you've had and the things you've done. So I appreciate you
mm.
sharing that.
Oh yeah.
And clearly protection is in your blood. You did it for your entire career with the Secret Service, and now transition to taking that to protecting and children and victims. So kudos to you and keep up the outstanding work there.
Oh, I love it. I love it, and I suspect that's just what I'm going to be doing. You don't get paid for being on these nonprofit boards, and that's okay. It's a labor of love, and I feel like I'm doing for others' kids what I would want done for mine if they were exploited or missing. So
Yeah.
it's a good fit.
That's an outstanding viewpoint. So I appreciate you on that. Well, let me, in talking about your career a little bit more, could you share why it was that Ken got into law enforcement? What drew you to that profession? And then, I guess my follow-up question to that would be why the Secret Service?
Oh man, great question. I don't think there was ever a time where I wasn't headed into law enforcement. I think even as a little kid, man, we played cops and robbers. I would always want to be the cops. That's what we did, and weapons have always been a thing for me, and enamored with that. And it didn't hurt that my uncle and my dad were both FBI agents, and my
Oh,
grandfather had been a police officer. So there was a lot of law enforcement in my DNA, and I think as I aged and went to college thinking this is what I'm going to do. And, I had my uncle and my dad both advising me. And, the miraculous thing that happened to me, I think, because I probably would have just done what they did and go FBI. I think that was my only thought was just to follow in their footsteps. And both great examples, great careers. Actually, my uncle was in for 3 years before he went back to practicing law. My dad was in 30 years. And
hmm.
look, he loved his career. He loved what he got to do, and he was good at it, and had a lot of success with the FBI. Retired as a GS-13, and loved it to the day that he retired. So I just saw a guy fulfilled in what he was doing, and just figured that's perfect for me too. Well, in 1988, I'm at Purdue University as a student. I think I'm a senior, and Ronald Reagan, sitting president, comes to Purdue, first time ever. And sorry, my dad gets asked to participate in the intelligence advance for that visit. And
Hmm.
as it turned out, Dad had arrested every single one of the guys that they were on the lookout for. So, uh, Dad, Dad was just Dad was a local cop with an FBI badge. I mean, that was kind of the
Yep.
way he looked at it, and that's what he taught me. And so, Dad came away from that experience saying, "Hey, you need to broaden your horizons. You need to look at some other options, and I think you would love the Secret Service." And so, I got to meet some of the guys and see them in action, and I got to go out to the airport where Reagan landed, and just kind of see what was going on. And it's like, there was just a tension there, a good kind of tension, and kind of an air to it that I thought, there's something to this, and practically forgot about it until I'm in law school, and Dad's like, "Hey, I know you're probably still thinking FBI, but I really encourage you." And Dad's a pretty smart guy, and I
Hmm.
really think, and nothing against any other agency, I just think that for this kid with probably some ADD in him, Secret Service was a great fit. And I remember going in. One of the guys who interviewed me, I asked him. I said, "Hey, what do you like about Secret Service?" And he thought for a second. Older guy, and he said, "Well," he said, "I tell you, I love doing investigations, but there comes a time when you kind of want to break." And he said, "Secret Service seems to know when that is, and so they send you on a trip." And he said, "About the time I get sick of being away from home, they send you back and you start all over again." And that is what I found to be the case. I got to do a lot of both the investigations and maybe even more protection. Was on the president's detail twice. So first time as a 13 and second time as a 14, and did a lot of travel, 74 countries, a lot of those countries multiple times. And so, you go to South Africa, that is one big, long, hairy trip, but I did it 4 times.
Oh
And so
man.
there's no, you don't get extra credit for that. You just get years taken off your life, I think. But I loved it. I love the tempo. I love just the pace of things, and that rhythm seemed to fit me. And it's probably not for everybody. And that's probably right. I mean, there's a good fit for everybody out there, but it was a good fit for me. So I give Dad a lot of credit for pushing me that direction.
That's a great story, and you're so right. Based off, I had the great fortune to work alongside Secret Service agents through my career, and heard very similar explanations that
Yeah,
you just gave, and it is a great, from my perspective, and those that I worked with and talked with, it's a great opportunity to travel and do some very interesting things. So I appreciate you sharing that, and hopefully
yeah,
that'll help somebody kind of guide them along the way when they're deciding what they want to do for a career.
yeah. People ask me, I tell them, hey, it's probably not exactly the same as when I was in. I've been retired for 5 years now, but I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great. I liked, getting jerked around a little bit and having to go short notice travel and do this stuff. And I think the difference maker for me was that supportive wife. Having a
Oh
spouse who
yeah.
understood. She's super flexible and really laid back. And so when I would say, "Hey, baby, got to cancel dinner plans. We got a counterfeiter loose in the city, and we think we know where he is. We're gonna go get him on a Friday or Saturday night." I never heard complaints about that. There were 3 times when I was on the president's detail the first time where I offered to quit because the tempo was just crazy. And 2 times she said no right off the bat. The third time she thought about it for a second and then said no. But it's not the easiest way to make a living. It beats working for a living, but it's not nothing. It's a
Yeah.
lot of travel, a lot of
Yeah.
nights, a lot of weekends, and just the unpredictability. I think was what made it tough on a lot of families. And thankfully I just had that miracle wife that was good with it.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. For a working lifestyle like that, you have to have an understanding and supportive spouse, uh so you can do that job. So
Yeah.
that's outstanding. Well,
Funny, I,
let's
I I don't think any of my kids are uh, looking to be Secret Service agents. It's like kids whose dad was a doctor, and they saw how hard they worked and how long they were gone and all that
mhm.
stuff. I don't. I've got one son in the military, in the Marine Corps, and then I've got another son that wants to be a police officer, but I don't think they want to be Secret Service. I think they've had enough of that.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask that if any of your children were pursuing law enforcement. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and transition to September 11th,
Mm.
2001. And those, like we said earlier, how things drastically changed in our lives here in America, whether it's travel, whether it's financial systems, whether it's access to government buildings. All these things have changed. And, you know, I think it's important to look at the way security is handled at one of our most sensitive government sites, the White House. So
Mm.
um, I I think it's going to be interesting to talk about this evacuation or in the subsequent evacuation that day and how it unfolded. So, what could you tell us where you were on that day on September 11th and how you found out that these attacks had occurred?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for setting me up here. Um, I was on the president's detail, and I remember 9/11 happened on a Tuesday, and that's important in my recollection because that week, and on the president's detail, you typically got your schedule for the next week late Friday night. They were due in by 10 p.m. if possible, and so you found out Friday night what you were doing starting Saturday night at midnight or 10 p.m. because that's when the work week started. The midnight shift started Saturday night at 10 p.m. and that was technically the first shift Sunday morning. And
Okay.
so and I found out that late Friday night that I had Tuesday and Wednesday off, which sounds like nothing, but it was a big deal to me because I had never had 2 days off in a row
Oh,
in
wow.
on the president's detail. And so I'd been on the detail a few years. I'd never gotten 2 days off in a row, and I was like, "This is awesome! I can plan something. I can do something." And my wife was able to take kids to the dentist, and so she was at the dentist office with kids. I was at home on a phone call with a buddy, being mentored really by a chaplain pastor guy out of Pennsylvania, and just he's just keeping me grounded and talking me through stuff. And during that phone call, he asked, he said, "Hey, do you have the TV on?" And I said, "No, I'm not." We had one TV, and it was a little
Hmm.
19-inch box TV. And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you may want to turn it on. Looks like a plane just hit a building in New York City." And of course, I'm picturing Piper Cub is lost control or something and hit a building, and hey, it happens, right? I mean, it happened in Kansas
Right.
City a few years before that. It happens. Furthest thing from my mind was an intentional terrorist act with a jumbo jet, and so we just kept talking. And next thing I know, he says, "Hey, another plane just hit the building," and that's when it's like, "Hey, wait a minute, that's no coincidence." And right about that time, we had pagers back then, so
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
the,
Yeah.
the younger members of your audience will probably not appreciate that we just had these little beepers, and I think we had the kind that would show a number for you to call, and the original kind just went off, and you were supposed to call a specific number, but these had a little window, and it told you what number to call, and I looked, and I knew that number. That was the number back to my ops center, and so I hung up with Jack and Mark and called in there, and they said, "Hey, are you watching the news?" And I said, "I am now. I see what's going on here." And he said, "All right, well, the president's in Florida, and so you're good for now." He said, "But go ahead and pack a bag and stand by." And I said, "Yes, sir." So I packed a suitcase, not knowing what for. We go on trips all the time, and you take a couple of suits, and you take a couple of some khakis and a fishing vest and some short sleeve shirts. You just don't know if you're going to a hot climate, cold climate. You just don't know where in the world you're going.
Right.
And so I took, I packed a suitcase full of stuff, not knowing. The second page I got, he said, "Hey, just checking to see if you've packed a bag and you're standing by." And I was like, "Boss, I not only have I packed a bag and I'm standing by, but I'm ready to go. I have seen this thing unfold for a couple hours now, and I am ready to go wherever you want me to go, and I will take out whoever you want me to take out, and let's do it. I said, why don't I just head on into DC? And he said, absolutely not. He said, do not come into DC right now. It's absolute chaos. He said, I want you sitting by the phone at home. Instructions are coming. And I said, it's hard to hear because
Oh
you're
yeah.
just so
You're
geeked up,
ready.
so ready to go, so ready to unleash, and you're being told, simmer down, and so that was hard. So I sit there for another couple of hours, and then here comes page number 3, and so I'm like, yes, sir, and I'll never forget because it's one of the hardest phone calls I ever got. He said, yeah, he said the president's on his way back to the White House. I think that was the timing, and he said, and we don't need you. And I was like, what? I mean, that is not what I wanted to
You
hear.
don't want to hear that.
Players want the ball. I was ready to go. Helmet or no helmet, I want in the game. I was ready to do some
Right.
damage. I'll go to New York. I'll go to DC. I'll go to Pennsylvania. I'll go wherever you want me to go, but not nowhere. I said, I'm coming into DC. And he said, I'm ordering you not to come into DC. He said, look, I need you sitting by the phone. He said, you're going somewhere eventually, but we just don't know where yet. So there was so much uncertainty, so much just chaos, really. The intelligence world was on its head, not knowing, how many more, and is this
Right.
it?
Trying to
And what
figure
are we
out what
doing?
happened.
Yeah, all of that. So man, that was hard because now I'm just angry. I'm angry at my people. I'm angry at their people. I'm fit to be tied and told we don't need you. And so that was hard. I
Yeah.
sat back down. Now it's getting on into the evening, and I get another page, and it's like, great. Well, I'll just, call back in, I guess. And
Right.
so I called in, and it was that same boss. They're all just in DC doing what they can do, and he said, hey, get to the White House immediately. And I was like, 10-4. So I mean, I was out the door in the shot,
Yeah.
headed to
0 to 100 right there.
well, and I'll never forget it because we lived about 24 miles from the White House out in Virginia, in Chantilly, Virginia. And I tore out of our neighborhood and got on the Highway 50 and then on the interstate I-66 going in. And 66, if you've ever been on it, it's just a stop and go parking lot. I mean, you go and then you stop, you go and you stop. And but on the night of 9/11 after dark, it was a parking lot. It was empty. I mean, there were zero cars, and so yeah, I'm in my little Nissan Maxima, and I'm getting the Maxima out of it. I mean, I'm screaming down I-66, and it's actually very windy, and I'm apexing all the way down the interstate. I passed 2 cars headed west, the entire stretch. Zero cars headed my
Hmm.
direction going east. And I went through the East Street Tunnel and I come up into DC proper, and found out how good my brakes are because the
Hmm.
road was blocked. A lot of red and blue flashing lights and military vehicles and a lot of big guns pointing right at me. And because they hadn't seen any cars coming in. And I was the first one. And so I got her stopped and very carefully got my ID out and my credentials. And
Yeah.
I said, hey, I'm Secret Service. I'm headed into the White House. And, they checked it all out and said, okay, 3 checkpoints before I made it to the normal checkpoints to get into the White House. So it was big time lockdown, a lot of different agencies and, protocols in place for 9/11 for this emergency. And I finally get into the White House and get the briefing, and we're going to be there all night. And they just didn't know. They didn't know if there was a ground attack coming. There was some intelligence saying that there was a ground attack being prepared. That there could be more planes out there. All this kind of stuff. And so it's like, hey, if you ever reverted to your training, tonight would be the night. So just be flexible, be ready, and here we go. And so we went in and relieved the guys who had been there for a while and pushed them off and settled into the night shift. And that's where we were, after this horrible day of watching on TV planes hitting buildings and explosions and seeing what happens Um, you know, we've never seen that before. It was surreal to now be in the White House, and it is absolutely silent. I mean,
Well, that's
nobody's
what I was going
cracking
to ask
jokes.
you.
Nobody's smoking and joking because it's just not. It's just it's 9/11. We've just had our butt kicked by these terrorists, and we're reeling. And it just didn't. There's no joking going on. Usually there's a lot of shots fired
Right, you're
verbally
busting
between us.
chops, and yeah,
Oh yeah,
exactly.
but not that night. And so it's very quiet. The airspace, you don't realize how much air noise pollution there is in the sky, and with all the planes grounded, Reagan Airport is shut down. It was dead silent in DC, and so it was a wild night to go into. After watching that on TV all day.
Let me ask you this. So, this is hours and hours after the attacks, and you're in the White House right there. Is it? Are you? I know everyone's trying to decipher what's next, what's going to happen. Are you guys, maybe this isn't the right term, bracing for impact? Like you're preparing, like, is the White House the next target here? In addition to trying to figure everything out in general, and coordinate the protection of the president, the vice president, etc. Are you planning an aspect of, hey, this is what we're going to do if we're attacked here in the White House?
Yeah, the that's a great question. And what I'll say to the credit of our training and our protocol is we already had our plans. We had already trained and rehearsed, and everyone knew their job. So it wasn't like we had to brief on an extra briefing about what we're going to do if this or that. We all knew that, and so it
Mm-hmm.
was like we used to have these cards that kind of told gave you different scenarios and what we might do, but the truth is we'd all practiced this and rehearsed what we were going to do, and there was definitely more tension in the air that night because we'd seen what these people are capable of doing, and the unknown is just scratching your brain because it's there's just so much now that we know that's possible. Well, what else is possible, and could they get more planes? What it just kind of stretched your mind to think what is possible and what might they be doing and planning next. The ground attack it's like, well, if they want to hit us from the ground, good luck, because we this is what we're ready for. Let's
Right.
you want to fight, let's fight. And especially
Right.
tonight, we're ready for it. We're ready to do some damage and to show them what we can do and punch back. I think we were all ready for that. I don't. There was no lack of confidence. There was no, wondering if we would be okay. I don't think. And so, we went into that, but sure enough, sometime right before midnight, I think it was, we get a pop over the air, and we had a code word for, if it was serious, there was a code word, and the code word that night was crash. And so if you heard the word crash, it's like you listen up because there wasn't a lot of radio traffic anyway. And so sure enough, we heard crash, crash, crash. And it's like they're coming over the fence, or what do we got?
Right. Right.
And the Joint Operation Command Center, we all had to rotate through there and work that, and so you got to see all the alarms and all the infrastructure that we had to protect the White House. We monitored the airspace, and so it was really a 360-degree sphere of protection around the White House, and we got eyes and ears and monitors and cameras, all of that
Right.
on that 360 sphere of protection. But when they said crash, we're listening, and they said, "Hey, we have an inbound aircraft." And it's like, oh, that's the one thing I don't want to hear. That was
Right.
bad. And so then you're curious. It happens. Planes out there that with pilots that aren't aware, they might break the outer ring, and they'll get intercepted by friendly Air Force fighter jets that, coax them into going in the
Right.
right direction, flare them if they have to.
Can I
But
pause you 1 second here and
yeah,
ask you a question? So at this point, when you come into the White House, when you're finally given the green light, you come in, you get there. At that point of your arrival, had the White House initially had it been evacuated?
yeah,
So
yeah. It
it
got
was
evacuated that morning
okay.
because of the
Those
because of the air
attacks.
threat.
Those
Yeah,
so
the air
okay.
threat.
So
The uniform division, because the president was out of town, so there were certain people there. I think maybe the first lady was around. There's the White House complex. There's 10,000 people there on
right,
any
you
given
have
day. So
staff, you have
yeah, they they
cooking, you
they
have
evacuated
yeah,
that whole thing. But then the all clear was given for those who were still in D.C. that needed to get back to the White House military and certain people that national security folks that are going to come back there, and so they're all back. The ones that have to be in place are back, going into the evening, and then I don't remember, it was maybe 8 o'clock or something. The president actually came back, and
that
so now
evening
we've got the full
President Bush
complement of that.
returns.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. That's right.
Okay. So just kind
And
of setting
so
the scene for listeners here. So it's evacuated
yeah,
when you get there for that certain amount of time, and then an all clear is given, and the essential or necessary staff come back in there. And like you just said, President Bush returns. So,
yeah,
and we're back to you get that crash, crash, crash call, and there's a jet or there's a plane. All right, pick it
yeah.
up from there.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. So
Yeah,
we've got an inbound aircraft. Now we know what the problem is. The additional information that they give us that we need to know is how fast is it going, what's the direction of travel, and what's the altitude. And all of those were bad. And those were,
mm,
you're looking for, hey, it's super high altitude, it's 40,000 feet. Okay, so it's a jumbo jet maybe, but it's no real threat to us at 40,000 feet. It's going 500 miles an hour, so it's not going to bust down on us. And or the direction of travel is going to skirt the outer edge of the no-fly zone. Again, not an immediate threat really. Well, this one was a beeline for the White House on a direct trajectory. It was at low altitude and it was going super hot. So all of those are bad. And so we
right.
actually have a chart that we can look at, and you can chart speed and distance, and it was getting awfully close. So based on the speed and the distance, we knew that we had at least 1 minute, but not two. And so really easy call. I mean, that kind of made it
Right.
easy to say, and the shift leader that night was Jeff. And Jeff made the easy call. We got to evacuate. Well, before you can evacuate, you got to get the president and first lady up. So, Jeff had to go, knock
So they're
politely on the door
sleeping
and
at
then
the
bust
time.
in and jerk them out of bed and say, let's go, move it, move it, move it. And we practiced that. We'd rehearse that. And what you do, well, the the protocol at the time was really built around no matter what the circumstance we're evacuating, and because the ground attack was seemed like the most likely scenario, we had one protocol, so you don't have to memorize a ton of scenarios. But depending on where you are in the rotation, and you worked details at the UN, and we put people in certain places, and the White House no
Right.
different. So everyone's got a position that you're in, and we rotate. So every 15 to 20 minutes, you're going to get pushed off that position. You rotate to the next one, push that guy, and that's how you get a break. After being on your feet for an hour and a half or so, you get a 20-minute break to sit down
Right.
and before you go and start the rotation all over again. And so uh, everyone needed to be cognizant of where they were, because where you were in that rotation dictated your role in the evacuation. And so it took me a second to, click. All right, my role. We're evacuating. Good. We know what to do. My role, and it dawns on me. dog, because I got the job that in training you love, but in reality, when we had to do it, it's the worst job
Mm.
because because it's like duck, duck, goose, and it's duck, 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 and I was the goose. So the
Oh,
goose's
okay.
job was to stay behind. So you're to cover the evacuation and then stay behind. And why? Well, because it was kind of built on a ground attack protocol, and so someone needs to stay behind and take fire, give fire if we're being pursued, so that everyone else can get away. And so you got an MP5, you got a pistol, a gas mask, and a radio, and it's like, hey, good luck. and
Well,
so
that's
and
what I
I've
was
got a
going to ask you.
yeah, I've got a uniform officer there with me as well, and the two of us are to stay behind and fight the good fight. And if and when we can re-enter, you're the point. You're still alive.
Hmm.
You're the point to usher them back in and lead them back to wherever they want to go. And so I realized I'm the goose, and so I did my job. I covered the evacuation, made sure they got out, and then it's like, well, it seemed like a poor time to argue the protocol. So, so I was like, well, we got a jumbo jet headed for the White House. I think I know how this is going to go down. And so instead of just standing in the middle of the hallway, I said, I want to at least try to survive the crash. So
Sure.
I went to the far end of the mansion, the box mansion of the White House, and the doorway to the palm room on the west side. Both they're symmetrical. So east and west side of the White House on the ground floor has a domed arch, and so it kind of archway, and it's really thick. The original walls of the White House are pretty thick limestone, and so maybe 2.5, 3 feet wide. And I thought, well, this is either going to be a great place to survive, or more likely, it's just going to make for a great coffin because
Oh, man.
we've seen how this goes down. I mean, if you don't die from the crush of the crash, you're gonna there's gonna be gas, there's explosion, there's all that stuff. You're just not.
Right.
I had to deal with that on the spot. I remember thinking, well, this is how it's going to end. And I remember just a quick prayer. I said, Lord, thanks. This has been great. And I was thinking about my wife, and we had our first child was a daughter, and she was about 2 years old. And then we had a newborn son. Wasn't thinking about him so much, but I was thinking about those girls. And I remember praying. I've kind of joked about it, but I prayed, Lord, uh, would you give my wife a better deal on round two? Give her an
Mm.
upgrade of a husband in round two, and just make sure it's somebody that'll be a good daddy to my little girl. And that was my prayer. And it's just like, well, here we go. And I had utter peace. I think I just that was just kind of the life that I lived, and the faith that I had said, well, you're going to heaven. It's going to be a little rocky, but you're going to get there.
You're going
And
to
now's
get
the
there. Yep.
time. So, but I had great peace in that moment, and I always have to remember to tell people the rest of the story. But in that moment, I knew the president, first lady were safe. They were evacuated, and it was just going to cost me and this uniform officer death. Will be celebrated someday, but we it's part of the sacrifice, and you just got to do what you got to
Wow.
do.
I cannot even imagine that. Those thoughts, all those thoughts racing through your head and preparing for that. That is unbelievable. So at that time frame when you're saying your prayer and this is going on, are you and the uniform officer the only two people on the premises there, or are there others spread out throughout the area, or is like you guys are it?
I think we were the only two people left inside the White House. Um, Now I don't know about upstairs. I mean, there are typically officers posted in the state dining room. I just don't know, or not state in the by the front door. I just don't know if they stayed in that spot, or if they were
Yeah.
said, "Hey,
How,
lock the front door and move off the X here."
yeah.
But I
How
know for
long are
sure there were
those?
two of us downstairs. So, and it
That
didn't
is
last long. I
unbelievable.
mean,
Well, that was,
we started with maybe a minute and a half, and the the evacuation was seamless. I mean, the president and first lady were very agreeable. They were gracious. They, other than grabbing a house coat, it's boxers and and nightgown, and we're off to the races here. And they were good about it. I even remember President Bush kind of laughing a little bit. I mean, it certainly wasn't funny, but he, that's just the kind of guy he is. I mean, he's good in a tough spot. And so they're gone, we're here, and then I'm just waiting. It's real quiet. I was just waiting for the impact. It's like, I wonder if I'll feel this. I wonder if I'll
yeah.
hear anything first. Can I hear
How
that
long
plane
is that
coming?
going
And
on? How long are you
it,
thinking this
it
stuff?
wasn't very long. It seemed like an eternity, but it wasn't very long. And then the next thing I get is radio traffic, and it's from our jock saying, all clear. I'm like,
Oh man.
all clear. I said, we're not, that's not enough of an explanation. Am I dying or not? I mean, it
Yeah.
was kind of frustrating. And so I don't remember too much I remember getting the president and first lady back into the White House, and, everyone's kind of relieved, and, we can go about our weird night on 9/11 at that point. But I remember them telling us that it was actually a friendly. It was an Air Force jet, and if you remember, I mean, the skies were shut down except for military, police, and emergency, medical type stuff, and they
Hmm.
had a pretty tight grip on all of that. Well, I'm pretty sure about this story. I've tried to verify it because the news has reported at least most of this, and the first lady wrote about the evacuation in her book, so that gave me good cover to talk about it. But what we think happened is that a an Air Force Reserve pilot, F-16 pilot from somewhere in South Carolina, maybe Shaw, was told, "Hey, we need you to relieve the air patrol in DC, head to DC, and we'll give you more instructions when you get there." Well, this guy is screaming toward DC. If you are coming from the South and you set your nautical equipment, aeronautical, on DC, it's it's figuring DC off the zero milestone, and the zero milestone sits on the south grounds of the White House. So you're quite literally headed for the White House if you have nothing more specific other than Washington D.C. And that's what this guy was told to do. And as he got closer and closer, um, he was on the wrong frequency to be communicating, and he did not have his transponder on. So they were not able to identify him until they scrambled jets from Andrews to go shoot this guy down. Didn't know what he was. Supposedly, he got the cockpit warning that you've been locked on and you're about to be shot down. And he came up on some emergency network saying, "Hey, I've been locked on. It's friendly, friendly." And they
Hmm.
said, "Hey, switch to the right frequency, turn on your transponder, and divert." And so I love telling this story, but uh, I thought I was pretty close to dying that night. I think that Air
Oh,
Force pilot was a whole lot closer than I was,
it
and so I'd
sounds
love to
like
meet
it.
him someday. But of course we didn't know that. So
Yeah. Wow. That is just unimaginable. To that, I'm just engrossed in that time frame where you're the only two in that White House and these thoughts are going through your mind. Are you here in that time frame? Are you hearing any radio traffic? Are you hearing anything about this jet? Are you hearing anything about the evacuation of the president? Or is it just that eerie silence where you're kind of alone with your thoughts,
yeah,
reflecting on everything?
there was a little bit of traffic, confirming back and forth. The shift leader is dictating what the shift does. I know my roles to stay behind, and then they're communicating with the jock to tell them, "Hey, here's where we are, and here's the situation." But then it got pretty quiet. I don't remember much traffic. Once they got out and got going, I don't think there was much traffic, and I think everybody, certainly at the Jock, they're talking with the military to figure out what's the intercept, how close are you, what's the status of that, and so they're then having to filter and sift that information before they pass it along. And so we didn't get any updates until it was all clear. And so those were a couple of tense moments. But
That's unbelievable. And you referenced it earlier, but just again, for the purpose of the listeners, when you're talking about the Jock and you're referring to that, that's the communication center or the
Mhm. Yeah,
communications.
we call it the Jock. It would be JOCC, Joint Operation Command Center, and it used to be at the White House, and then we moved it to a little safer location off the X. But yeah, we man that 24/7. It's where the Uniform Division and special agents monitor everything about the White House, all the comings and goings, the gates, the alarms, the agents and officers, and they coordinate everything from the Jock. And so that is the
Yep.
nervous system for the White House complex, and it's off complex now.
Okay. All right. And again, I you beat me to the punch when you described that situation there. One of my questions was going to be, what was the most intense or unforgettable moment for you that day?
Oh,
I'm assuming that that was clearly it, but I got
that
to
was
ask it in the event there was something else more, sensational.
it. Yeah,
That
yeah.
was it.
And
Yeah,
it's
that
funny.
is just, that kind of gives me chills.
I don't remember driving home that morning. Of course, I'd been up all day and then all night, and I thankfully made it home. But I do remember my my wife and the kids were up when I got home, and I remember telling her, "Hey, here's what went down last night," and it was hard to tell her about that because everything, you're just exhausted and everything you've been through. But and I think what was weighing on everybody, in addition to just that little scenario, is that our country has just been, rocked, and
Right.
there are still people probably alive but buried. Rescue efforts are underway at the Pentagon and at the World Trade Centers, trying to recover people, and so we got our butt kicked, and now we're trying to save any and all that we can, but it's all going on and it's all churning and it's all still very raw. So it was that was quite a day, quite a night.
Oh, yes. Yes. Again, I keep using the phrase, I can't even imagine it. So that is incredible. And, kind of springboarding off of what you're saying there is I've been fortunate to have a couple guests on the show that have talked about their experience after the fact with 9/11. They were there in New York City when the planes hit the towers and they were involved in, recovery or rescue efforts and then transitioning into the recovery efforts. And it's just, it's important. It's such a tragic event, but I think it's just so important to discuss the wide ranging effects that it had on America. Everything from those towers and the buildings falling to rubble and then trying to recover survivors from it to individuals like you that were thrust into those situations that those last fleeting thoughts are going through your mind thinking, this is it. This is it. So it's again, um, it's just an important part of our history that it needs to be shared. And I appreciate you sharing
Yeah.
your aspect, your piece of the pie in that day.
Yeah, it's funny. I've thought about this in retrospect, and um, airspace was always important to us, and we'd already had at least two planes crash at the White House. One, I think, landed safely at the White House. Another one crashed because there were tents on the south grounds, and he ended up crashing into the trees that I think they're removing right now, these old magnolia trees, but crashed right at the south grounds, right outside the windows there at the White House. So airspace was always on our mind. I mean, the use of an airplane as a weapon has always been something that we thought of. Um, there were even attempts to hijack planes from Reagan Airport before it was called Reagan Airport, and then get it up and crash into the White House. We monitor those planes departing and coming into Reagan, uh, all day long. And so it was always on our mind. But 9/11, unfortunately, that's what it takes sometimes to get other people to listen to you and talk about it, and then to do what you have to do to mitigate those risks, and be taken seriously when you say, hey, we could be the targeted by an airplane here. And so 9/11 had the effect of getting people to listen when we say we need to be able to evacuate and safely get off the X. And I don't just mean, be put someone down behind cover when there are bullets flying, but to get
Right.
off the X completely, because what if we're targeted by a hijacked aircraft, or someone's going to fly a Learjet into the stage here. So we did get, and still have, I think, some street cred, unfortunately, for making those preparations, and having that kind of planning in our back pocket.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to say, it's always been my opinion that the Secret Service is somewhat of an elite uh, department or agency, and that, when you guys say it's time to roll, then it's time to roll. There's no pushback from the people you're protecting.
Yeah, you would think not, but I wish I could say that's 100% true. I think sometimes we do get pushback, and you have to fight the good fight. But hey, most of the time we're trying to be reasonable with our requests, and work well with the people that we protect, and everyone participating in that game.
Yep. Yep.
I need a quick break if I can.
Yep. Let me pause. So it sounds like, I've always looked at Secret Service as an elite law enforcement, federal law enforcement agency. And it clearly sounds like on this tragic event that your training prepared you to address this appropriately, that kind of incident. Does that sound right?
Jim, I think you're absolutely right. I think Secret Service does a good job of training. You could always do more. I think if you're a tier one special ops group in the military, you get 90% training to 10% operational. Secret Service can't really do that. I mean, we don't have the people, the personnel, or the time to do that, and so we do. On the president's detail, you do 2 weeks of midnights, you do 2 weeks of afternoons, you do 2 weeks of day shift, and then you rotate out for 2 weeks to do training. So it's
Hmm.
6 weeks on, and then 2 weeks of training. We go out to Beltsville, and we shoot them back up. We start over with handcuffing and motorcade, tactics, and all this kind of stuff, and it's outstanding training. And hey, nobody's too good for a refresher on, here's what we're going to do in an emergency. And so I think that really paid off. And when I started writing a book, which really didn't set out to write a book, I was just telling my kids stories and giving advice, and someone picked up on it and said, hey, this would make a great book if you just do some more work on it. So I did some more work,
Yeah.
and came up with a book. But in the book, and I know you and I were talking earlier, um, I didn't put a chapter in the book about 9/11 because it didn't seem so appropriate. But I do talk about 9/11, but I talk about it in the chapter where I'm kind of preaching about how important preparation is and how important training is. And so the chapter, I said, uh, opportunity preparation. And in my saying to my shift back in the day when I was leading teams in the Secret Service, I said preparation meets opportunity. And on 9/11, we had that unfortunate opportunity to evacuate the president. Well, we'd all done this many, many times, but nobody in Secret Service history has evacuated a sitting president, first lady from the residence under stress. And what bore out that night was that the training worked. The all the preparation, all the training, all the thinking through these scenarios, it worked, and it worked well. So we had them out of there in a flash. It worked very, very well. And so in the book, Cheating Death, I talk about the importance of preparation. And if you expect opportunities to come your way, then you better get prepared. And so I think that's a good mantra for life, is that preparation meets opportunity. And when we're prepared for the opportunities of life, the opportunities will come. And, if you're not prepared, the opportunity comes to somebody else.
Yeah, you're
so,
right.
so that kind of bore out that night. And that's, one of the things that I talk about in the book. And, I talk about leadership and hardship and friendship, but preparation meeting opportunity. I talk about faith. I talk about identity. But I'm telling stories to go with the advice that I'm giving. It's all true stories, but um, I gave you more here than I gave in the book about 9/11.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is an incredible story. And I had planned to, and we still are, to talk about your books at the conclusion here,
Hmm.
but have you got a copy of your book that you can hold up
I
to
do,
show
yeah. I
people?
never have them too far away, right? So
Yeah,
that
perfect view.
is the
Yeah.
book, and
Cheating death.
um,
And
Cheating
that,
Death. This photo is from the 2005 inauguration of President Bush. He's the one inside the car, and this is me on one side, and my good buddy Glenn on the other. And the publisher was cool enough to let me use that photo. But I talk about cheating death, and it's not about a specific event. It's just a term that we used in the Secret Service, especially on the President's detail, to talk about what we were doing, but also as a way to remind each other about the seriousness of what we're doing. And if you're not prepared, someone else is. And so if you're, bad guys are training to beat you every day, and if you don't train harder and smarter and better than they do, then there's a chance they're going to jump up and bite you. And
yeah,
we were just insisting on not letting that happen. And so we would chide each other about cheating death, and about how important the mission is. And it doesn't take a rest. So it's ongoing to this day. You gotta be intentional about cheating death.
yeah. And as you're talking and explaining this here, it kind of made me think you're a man of religious faith. Did that play into that situation at that time, that night, when everybody evacuated and these thoughts were running through your mind? Did you fall back on and essentially rely on the faith that you have to 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 hopefully come to a positive outcome?
Well, Jim, I think so. I think that was part of that. I think without faith, I think that night I probably would have been flipping out at the idea of dying in the next 10 seconds. But the truth is, it was one of the most peaceful experiences I've ever had, especially to be under that kind of stress and uncertainty. But man, once I decided, I think there was a little bit of me arguing with myself about whether or not you could survive a plane crashing from the south into the White House that you're standing on the ground floor of, and me thinking, well, there's a little bit of hope. And then it dawned on me that there's no hope here. I mean, it ends now. So let's get used to that idea. And it didn't take me any time at all. And I think the peace that overtook me is what the Bible talks about when it talks about a peace that surpasses understanding. Yeah, I can't explain that. I can't rationalize that. It came over me like a blanket, and I was at peace. I just had peace. It's all going to be fine. And my wife, I was praying that she would be taken care of, but I believed what was going to happen to me in that moment was that I would pass from death to life through faith in Christ, and I had great peace about that. I don't know what else to do with it except
Sure.
to say if you don't have that peace, I don't think you're going to get it in that moment unless you got it ahead of time. So I think for me, the decision about what was going to happen to me in that moment was made the day that I said, I surrendered my life years before in a relationship with the Lord, and so I think when the time came, even spur of the moment, it just there wasn't a lot of doubt. There wasn't, I'm not like fighting to say, hey, can I, can I please come to heaven? I think that was decision's already been made, and so I had a lot of confidence in that moment. I'm not sure I would have had that if I, wasn't walking with the Lord prior to that.
Yeah. Yeah. That it sounds you sound that sounds very accurate. So I was curious about that. And this clearly, I'm putting myself in your shoes as you recount this story. I'm trying to think, how would I have reacted, and what would the aftermath be of something like that? How would it affect me? You know, how how does that incident affect you personally and professionally? I guess by that I mean, do you reflect back upon that incident even now today, thinking back, gosh, that was a pretty hairy scenario, and I made it through? Or does it have any lasting effects on you, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think certainly you are a collection of your experiences, and so now I have to, I've got that experience, and that is going to color your your worldview, your perspective on things going forward forever, especially a big event like that. I think the takeaways for me, number one is that preparation really does meet opportunity. So the training is important. Training works, and when you take it seriously and do it right, when you're given the opportunity to do it under stress, it goes a lot better than if you don't take it seriously or you don't do it at all. Training works. So whether it's weapons handling or evacuations or just knowing your business, the training, the preparation, the mental attitude going into that matters. And so that certainly has taught me to take seriously whatever I'm going to do. If I'm going to do it, let's do it right. And I think, back to that whole spiritual thing, I think you just don't get a lot of opportunities to, to think seriously about life after. And I think for me, that clarified the fact that I actually do believe, that I'm
Hmm.
going to be fine, that there is life after, and I'm in good hands. And, I think if I'd have been jumping out of my skin in that moment, it's like, well, it made me question my faith. If you really believe what you say you believe, but in that moment, I wasn't jumping out of my skin. I had perfect calm. It's like, well, here we go, and
Yeah.
it was okay. So I think I carry those two things with me. Hey, preparation meets opportunity, and if you want opportunities, if you want to be prepared in the moment, you better do it ahead of time because there's no time to do it when the chips are
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. Wow. Great advice. That is spot on. You know, kind of shifting a little bit here, and maybe you can talk about it, maybe you can't. This event, 9/11, and the evacuation of a sitting president and first lady, did that create the aftermath? Did that create any new security protocols that the Secret Service operated under for situations like that? Or was it pretty much you guys had prepared for something like that? You did what you were prepared for and it all worked out.
Yeah,
Does
I
that
don't.
question make sense?
There's probably somebody that disagree with me, but I really don't think it changed anything. I think we were wiser to the possibilities. out there, and maybe it stretched our thinking about what the possibilities are. But the general protocol, the response, to my recollection, didn't change at all. And I came back when President Obama came into office. I came back as a supervisor at the White House, a shift leader, so operational shift leader. And I remember going to tabletop exercises, and it's like, who's sitting at this table that's been through what I've been through. And man, I had great peace going into those to say, well, I've already been through, thinking that an airplane was coming in. So nothing's going to surprise me at this point. So what's the
Right.
scenario? What do we got? And
Yeah.
here's what we will do. And really the protocol hadn't changed too much. I don't think anything forced us to rethink or to uh, to say that didn't work. It did work, and it would have worked. Had there been an actual airplane, I think everyone would have survived and been fine, except for the two guys standing in the White House. I think we would have had a hard time.
You drew the short straw that day.
Yeah, we were the geese.
Yeah. I think we covered this topic thoroughly, but
Mm.
I'd like to ask, is there anything that you think we should circle back on, or anything additional you feel is appropriate to mention about this topic?
Oh, I think I'm good. I appreciate the way you brought us into that scenario and talked through it, and so I think we're good.
Yeah, I agree. I think so too. Let's kind of transition to this. We talked about it. We talked about your career and getting into the career and everything. I want to touch on suggestions that Ken has for young people out there that want to be a law enforcement officer, that think they want to be a federal agent, that maybe think they want to be a Secret Service agent. What if any suggestions or guidance could you provide for them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In fact, I think that's the best question you've asked, because if we can't replicate ourselves and prepare the next generation, then we've kind of wasted some of our time. But I, for me, probably the best advice is to start doing now the things that you're going to do later. You don't get handed a badge and a gun and then decide, I'm going to get in good shape and I'm going to start doing things right. I think if you're going to be in law enforcement, then that's a disciplined lifestyle, and the discipline really needs to start and continue throughout your career. So, whether it's fitness, that just needs to be a part of your lifestyle, is staying in shape and maintaining good fitness, making good decisions. You're going to have to make decisions rapidly in law enforcement and on the spot. And I think making those hard decisions when the stress is not there is part of that preparation. Um, Schooling is important, and I think for a lot of jobs, I don't think you need a college degree, but I think they're going to require them in a lot of these positions, especially federal positions. So you might as well just get it and get it over with. But I wouldn't go into big debt to do it. I just don't think nobody cares where you went to college, honestly. I
Right.
went to Purdue University. It's got a little bit of a reputation for some people, and nobody gives a flip whether you went to Purdue or you went to community college or you got your online degree from, some online thing. Nobody
Right.
cares as long as you got that. You just kind of have to check that box. And I think once you've got that, they can't take it away from you. That's what my dad said. Hey, you got something now nobody can take away from you. So, making those kind of decisions to stay in good shape, to make good decisions, and check off these boxes that you need to check, and then in my case, the spouse is what made the job. I mean, if my wife had not been supportive, I was going to put her first. But for heaven's sakes, if she just said this isn't working, you can go do something else. I'm sure wasn't going to argue. But she was supportive and helpful, and so I think going into law enforcement, you need agreement with your significant other to say this is what we're planning to do, and if you need to make a change, make a change. But man, it's not the easiest way in the world to make a living, because once you're given that badge, it tends to color your on duty and off duty life, and it can be a consuming thing. In fact, one of the chapters in my book, I talk about identity, because I think it's so critical that that not be your identity. But it's really hard. I mean, it creeps into everything that you do, and every part of your life, everywhere you go. Can you get me out of a ticket? And you go into a restaurant, and guess what? You want to be able to see the door. I mean, it just kind of comes with the territory, and you can't turn that off a lot of times. So you need to know what you're getting into. I do as many ride-alongs as you can. I tell people with Secret Service that uh, the very best Secret Service agents, and I wasn't one, had local law enforcement experience, because that is where you gain common sense. But the best feather in your cap to get into federal law enforcement is military service. So, the people who can do both are ahead of the game. I mean, if you've got military service and law enforcement experience, and I'm not saying military police, but I'm saying you've got your military time and you've got local law enforcement, you're going to make a great agent. You're going to make a great law enforcement officer going forward, just because of the common sense, and then that experience under your belt. Good stuff.
Yeah, that is some of the greatest advice I've heard somebody give
Hmm.
for folks interested in law enforcement. So I appreciate that.
Well, we're going to have to bottle that.
That's
Maybe I
good
can sell
stuff.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have not slowed down since retiring from the Secret Service. You're a
Yeah.
busy person. And,
Yeah.
like we referenced a little bit earlier, you've written a book, you've written a couple books.
Yeah.
You're a leadership consultant. You do speaking services. Share some details about that. Share some more details about your books and what you're doing now.
Yeah. What I found is not that I'm aging. I mean,
No, not at
of
all.
course that I'm not aging, but I have found recently that if I sit on the couch too long, I get pretty stiff. So yeah, I don't sit a lot. I keep moving. I told you about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children,
Yeah.
and I love that engagement. That's my national focus, and then I've got a local focus with the Well House. Um, I do consulting in the operational risk and corporate security space, and I'm on the board of advisors at a technology company too that I'm very excited about, because it's going to change the way we do law enforcement, because we've now got the ability to detect anything we want to detect, whether it's gunpowder or drugs, and we can do it through water, through metal, through anything. And so, you think about securing a site or shipping containers coming into the U.S. I can now tell you with a device the size of a laptop computer whether or not there are illegal drugs on that ship pulling into port. And
Wow.
it's fascinating technology. It's called base molecular resonance technology, and it's going to change. It's going to give law enforcement, security, our military, the upper hand, and that's just the security and law enforcement side of it. But we can also detect 200 kinds of cancer with the push of a button. So there's medical ramifications too. I mean, in the future, nobody should be seeing stage 3 and stage 4 cancer, because we can detect it and pick it up very very early, non-invasively. So yeah, I'm busy with that. I've written 2 books. Cheating Death was my first book, and we've kind of talked about that. But it's stories from the Secret Service that I added to make my ramblings about leadership and friendship and identity and preparation, meeting opportunity, and all that kind of stuff. I just I figured nobody wanted to hear what I had to say about that unless I paired it with a good story from my time in the Secret Service. So yeah, I talk about training. Love talking about the training that we went through and some stories from that. And then I talk about being on a golf course with Tiger Woods and talking with him, and different stories, different chapters about stuff. One of the biggest chapters I talk about is decision making, because I just feel like, there's no good textbook to teach people how to make decisions. And so with my 5 kids, 3 boys, 2 girls in mind, I wrote about decisions that we made. Should we take this transfer? Should we not? And, kind of this decision making process that I went through. And so I described that in the book and tried to pair it with some good stories, and, to make it go down better. And then the second book I wrote is a devotional. So there are no stories in that one. It's called Staying Sharp, and it's more just a straight up devotional. So if you're, faith-based kind of person, that might be something that you like. But it really emanated from Cheating Death, because one of the chapters in here, I call it the friendship chapter, but it's about support and challenge. And my argument in that chapter in Cheating Death is that, if you're going to be as sharp as you need to be, then you need to be supported by friends, and you need to be challenged by friends. And you don't need a bunch of yes people around you all the time. That's just cheerleaders. You need people going to tell you the truth. And if you're doing something stupid, then you need a buddy that's going to tell you you're an idiot. If you do that, you're an idiot. So I talk about support and the importance of having that challenge in your life. And so when I turned to writing that second book, I called it Staying Sharp, and it comes from that concept of support and challenge. So there's 104 devotions in there, the daily devotion kind of thing, and the first 52 are like support. It's the scripture that everybody loves, telling you it's all going to be good, and how much you're loved, and how it's all a good news story. And then the second half, and you can go back and forth, but the second 52 is the challenge side, and it's where I put a boot up your butt and tell you, what? Yeah, it's going to be fine, and it's going to be fine because you're going to get off the couch and do something today. And so it's support and challenge. So if you need a little bit of challenge in your life in addition to support, then I got a devotional for you.
That sounds outstanding.
Staying sharp. Yeah, it's fun. It was
fun. Yeah. Well, you've got a website that is put together great, and it's kind of all inclusive about you and your books and what you do. Mm-hmm. What is that website?
Well, I will tell my son that he did a great job, because he's the one
give him
that
a thumbs up
and did all that. But yeah, it's just KennethValentine.com. And yeah, I talk about the books, a little bit about the career and these other boards that I'm on, and all that. Of course, you can book me to speak from there too, but you can Google Ken Valentine as well, and that website will pop up. But KennethValentine.com.
All right, excellent. Well, Ken, hey, I want to say sincerely thank you for being a guest on the show today. Eye-opening story. And I just want to thank you for taking the time today to share that and to share about your career and to share your experiences. So thank you.
Jim, you're a great American. You thank you for your service, and I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast. I've watched prior episodes. I'm a fan, and so it's been a pleasure and delight for me to be on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, like I said, in preparing for today, you have such a fantastic career with so many great stories. I hope you'll consider in the future maybe coming back again and sharing another story.
Hey, deal.
All right.
I'll just give you a pre-thumbs up on that. So
all right, deal. All right. Well, hey, Ken, thank you. And let me shift to my listeners here. As always, I want to thank you for listening. And I just want to continue to ask, please like, follow, share, and subscribe to my social medias so I can continue to bring you top caliber guests like Ken Valentine. So listeners, thank you. And thank you for your support. And everybody, please stay safe out there.
Amen.
The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.